Welcome to the 13th episode of Access to Art, produced by the Minneapolis Television Network to give you an indication of what's going on in your great community. We cover the big deal, high-profile, artsy, institutional things, as well as those underbelly items that artists like to play around in. And we're at Minneapolis Central Library today to look at the Altered Book exhibition, actually a few displays inside, and to introduce you to some remarkable arts events around Minneapolis. In the Heart of the Beast, Puppet and Mask Theater connects with its community and audience with flower, newspaper, water, and ideas. Their latest mainstage production, Beneath the Surface, is part 2 of a trilogy about water. Access to Art correspondent John Akre visited their home on Lake Street for a backstage look at this Circus of Wonderments.
Let's get started. In the Heart of the Beast, Puppet and Mask Theater is a theater company, but it's also an extended community of artists. We do shows, and we teach and conduct residencies, and we create one-of-a-kind celebrations.
Well, the play is about water. It's a circus-style play about what is beneath the surface, our water, and how it makes it to our taps.
I started thinking, well, what kind of work can we do here in water-rich Minnesota? How can we be aware of how our own personal actions are affecting the water? One day I'm standing in the lobby of our theater, and I look over at our drinking fountain that is sitting there with a sign on it that says, out of order. And every year we say, well, you know, we don't know how much it'll cost. We don't know what's wrong with it. You know, it's hard enough keeping a small arts organization alive. Well, you know, we can't have it be a priority. We started selling water in plastic bottles. $3! We've already stepped into the privatization of water. Maybe it's through that lens of what we do in our own lives, where we can start seeing how the impact of each person mounds up and accumulates. How can you say who owns the water? It's like the water that's in my body, the water that flows in every living cell of the body. Who can you say who owns the water? It's something we share.
It is the second episode in a 3-parter that Heart of the Beast is doing about water as a resource in our world.
And in this episode, we focus on the quality issue of water, and especially being in Minnesota.
So that brings us to look at the Minneapolis Waterworks, the larger circle of water.
Down like creeks bubble into streams, running rapidly, dancing in rivers, gliding forth.
All of us as a team did research together. Then Aditi, Brenner Kapil, came in as a scriptwriter, playwright, and helped take the ideas that we initially had and put them into a little bit of a narrative structure.
Traditionally in theater, the writer writes the script and everyone has to stick with it. I don't get that kind of power here at all. I just change it when they don't like it. And we started creating draft after draft after draft, and they would do improv and they'd tell me what they came up with, or I'd come and watch and take notes, and it sort of evolves on a company basis.
That's the organization of a circus, is that, ladies and gentlemen, we now present da-da-da-da-da-da.
And you wanna see it right, don't you?
And then as director, I'm like the editor. Sometimes that really uncomfortable position, or laying things on the table when I just think that what we have doesn't work, and saying, okay, we have to take scissors here, cut here, paste here. Because you're transferring things from one to another often, it's like the three of you need to be in exactly the same kind of breath.
This is Puppet and Mask Theater, so we do a lot of puppetry and mask work. The scene we've been working right now has the most intense puppetry work. We have the Bunrak style puppet, and then we have just rod puppet. All of them are water puppet, but then becomes the clouds and rain. Those are actually the masks falling down.
Masa, he is playing the character Thirsty. When we toured the wastewater facility in Pig's Eye, Masa said, He had understood it intellectually, but he hadn't gotten it until that moment, that his body was literally part of that watershed, taking in the river water, passing through him, and returning to the river. That's the journey that his character takes.
I'm part of the watershed!
And here, I do pretty much every aspect of theater. So I can be a performer at the same time, designer and a creator, and also the builder of the puppets.
People have been working hard to take huge amounts of information into something that can be presented as a circus act.
There are scores of polluting facilities lining the Mississippi River.
It's highly collaborative, ever evolving. It requires a lot of flexibility, but it's also a really fun adventure. There's a lot of unnecessary waste of water out there. There's a lot of very unnecessary pollution of water out there, and we don't have to drink from plastic water bottles. We have some of the best water in our taps, and I do hope the audience walks out of here thinking, hey, I have tap water, and, you know, changes their lifestyle in some small way, which I think that's Sandy's goal, too. I think she's here to change lives.
Of the book and attacking the book, and whose book is this, and what are you doing to my book? And first and foremost, do you think it is even prudent to let artists like this in a library? Don't you think you should get extra security to protect all the volumes out there from the artists, the renegade souls who would do these things to books? I'm here at Minneapolis Central Library with Melinda Ludwizak, who is the coordinator for arts and business partnerships with the library. And we're in the Cargill Gallery where Unbinding the Book, Altered Books, I think that's the name, show is currently up. And I have to ask you, what prompted you to do such, well, a crazy and magnificent thing?
San Francisco Public Library and the Portland, Maine Public Library have done altered books exhibitions in a little bit different fashion than we've done here. And that gave us the idea, and we're starting a trend. Some of the artists in this show told us that this was the first time they've ever been in a totally altered books exhibition. Some shows will do pieces around books and book arts, and sometimes they'll bring in an altered books piece as part of that. But we're one of the first shows that looks at this form entirely.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say, this stuff I find so powerfully exhilarating. I don't know why it isn't happening to, again, every book in your library, and now you'd better go protect them.
I will.
Thanks a lot, Melinda.
Thank you, Tom.
For 6 years, sculptor Aldo Moroni has been building, destroying, and rebuilding Babylon in his Northeast studio. This next segment features the unveiling of the final incarnation of the cradle of civilization, featuring the Tower of Babel and Moroni himself. Access to Art Correspondent Laura Stopyro spoke with Aldo and some of his supporters at a recent event.
Babylon is civilization layers, one atop the other, atop the next, and it goes back 12,000 years. It's the area between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. The idea being that between those two areas, a lot of scholars agree that if there were a place that was the Garden of Eden, this would have been it.
I have built the beautiful city. I have fed the people. I have cared for the earth.
I think it's a very good piece of work. And I like the fact that it's been going on for so many years. It's been 5 years.
I think it raises questions about why humans have developed the way they have and what motivates people to behave the way they do.
This is 4.5 feet tall, and it's built on a 4-foot wide disc, and it's 550 pounds of clay built on a 300-pound plaster armature, which is built on another armature, meaning bones inside of it. And the bones inside of it are a combination of wood and industrial, fabricating tubing.
Build the great city, the great civilization, the great work of art, to bring my truth to the world. Inscribed on the city of Babel.
This has been a building of civilization from, I'll call it 12,000 BC, probably up to about 4,000, 5,000 BC.
It's always interesting to see an artist who is sticking to a particular theme and idea for so many years, because it gives this artist a chance to really develop not only the sculpture and the visual aspect of it, but also the idea and the history.
I enjoy the idea of Aldo bringing attention to the concept that civilization is based on killing the king and it's time to stop.
It's like make me thinking about my history. It's Babylon is like, you know, it's my blood.
So Babylon continues to build and destroy itself until it comes to a conclusion. I had set this up, either I would expire or the war would end. Well, I am banking on the notion that the war will end, indeed. And so we are bringing Babylon to a conclusion.
Now I take to destroy that which I have made. Because in creation and destruction, all things are tied together, and the new can be revealed.
Personally, this sculpture has had an impact because I've been able to see Aldo grow. I've seen him refine his art, the colors, the textures, and really the documentation.
It has been an emotional roller coaster ride for him as an artist, particularly at the moment where last year when he just destroyed his own work.
Oh, it's a huge project for anybody to take on. There's just so much history.
Oh, it's insane. I hope it doesn't kill Aldo.
And you could see at the end of the show, it took him a while to recover from that. I mean, it was physically draining and emotionally draining. And that's how this project has been for him, physically and emotionally draining.
We're with book arts historian Dr. Betty Bright, who curated the Altered Books exposition here, or exhibition, I should say, here at the Minneapolis Library. And at the reception, you gave a talk about the history of altered books that I thought was downright lyrical. It's apparent how much you like this stuff. Is it that book arts are coming of age, or we're just more aware of them?
I think it's a little of both. Mm-hmm. I think from my research, really the 60s, when everybody was experimenting with everything, mm-hmm. and artists were organizing and breaking all the rules, they started breaking rules with books as well as making beautiful books by hand, but it was the whole range of expression. So organizations started up in the 70s to support book art. MCBA started in the 80s. So it's really been a progression, and we're just very fortunate in the Twin Cities to have that kind of a resource here.
The range in this show is extraordinary, but is there anything that unifies these artists other than the concept of the book?
Well, to be frank, I think it's a response and a strong identification with books. The artists recognize the power of the book. They recognize mm-hmm. that people identify with it, so if they want to make a statement, boy, they're going to work with books. But once you leave that, You have humor, you have anger, you have political commentary. It's just like any other kind of art form. It opens itself up to what the artist wants to say.
How long is the show up?
It's up through March.
March 2008, if you're tuning in the future. But track down this stuff. Google Betty Brighton. You can find all kinds of wonderful resources about altered books. The Workhouse Collective is a theater company run by playwrights. Now that's a good idea, so that they have more control over how their plays are produced. Though still in its infancy, the 14-member collective has already made a big splash on the Minneapolis theater scene. Access to Art Correspondent Laura Stopyro attended their show God Save Gertrude and spoke with several members of Workhouse Collective.
Punk rock queen.
When I write plays, I feel like I think about the total theater experience. I do think about what does it look like, what does it sound like, where does the audience sit. Being drawn to playwriting as a theater maker rather than being drawn to it as a literary form.
We need to see the plays in 3 dimensions because they're meant to be that way.
You remember this one, right? Some say I'm a rock and roll legend, the queen of Eastern punk.
And I'm the playwright of God Save Gertrude and a producing director of the Workhouse Collective.
I'm one of the founders and right now producing director.
We're all playwrights. We basically produce our own work and we work to produce each other's work. So the buck stops with the playwright and the playwright gets to put on the show as they want to. As the producer or artistic director of the company during my show, I can make the call that I want the action to happen all around the audience.
If a man shoots at one of my citizens, he will lose his trigger finger.
The important thing about the space is that it started with the writer, and then it was envisioned by the set designer and supported by the director, which is not the usual.
Oh, you sure caused a riot this time, didn't you, Mom?
I want the poster to look like a rock and roll poster. I want to hire a fashion designer instead of a costume designer because I want that kind of artistry.
In addition to traditional seating, there were piles of books that were wrapped in masking tape, and there were coffee tables and end tables that were all meant to be set on.
It was really important to me to have a real live band that actually played together on their own. They have a shorthand, they understand each other, they're super tight. It's a concert and the action's happening all around you and the audience is stuck in the middle of it and there's live music and what's going on, and Gertrude's performance of these songs is part of the story of the play.
Would you miss me if I fell?
There's been a lot of really positive response to Gertrude, and I think that's because of how it was approached as an event. Again, moving more away from this literary idea of theater as just a couple of people talking, on a set, but more about an event with the music and the entire space being altered. And
we became company in residence at the Playwright Center starting this past August, and we did Dominic's play, a short play about globalization.
It was really remarkably successful, actually, and we got a terrific notice in City Pages and a lot of support from the community, and that was great. Yeah, the press has kind of been rolling. We got really good press for a short play and then kind of extraordinary amount of press for this show.
One, I feel really driven to try to bring in new audiences to the theater.
This work is completely untested, and we're bringing it to you for the first time here in Minneapolis. It's not coming from either one of the coasts. It's not coming from Chicago. It's coming right from here.
I feel so lucky to be here in Minneapolis, where I feel like I'm supported as an artist. People are interested in me as an artist. I have a community of like-minded artists. There is a culture of audiences and supporters who are interested in supporting the new works.
I'm with book artist Jennifer Hibbard, and we're flanking her piece, Missing the Point, at the Altered Book Show. And this is one impressive work. Jennifer, what prompts you to do this to a book?
Well, the Altered Book is new to me. What prompts me to make a piece like this, though, is the horrible things I see on the news.
Mm-hmm.
This is just my way of taking that out on a productive activity.
What I especially like, it is very easy to look at it, understand it, and maybe have you communicate a lot of political frustration that were we to debate would just go nowhere.
Yes, I've always wanted to put a message and use words in my art, and I found that very difficult to actually create the words.
Mm-hmm.
So in here I'm actually removing and playing with words that are already there, and I find that much easier.
The Museum of Russian Art is the only nonprofit museum in North America dedicated to the preservation and display of 19th and 20th century Russian art. The museum works with museums and collectors both here and in Russia to provide rotating exhibits that capture the diversity of Russian art. Access to Art correspondent Hamill Griffin Cassidy recently visited the museum. The exhibits you'll see in this segment are open through the end of April 2008.
Russian art is sort of a stepchild of Western art history.
I think there's something in the American psyche that says, the only thing these people ever did was paint in sort of dour greens and grays and blacks.
People really discover artistic treasures that, but for this museum, they would never see. The Museum of Russian Art is actually the only museum in North America solely dedicated to the preservation and presentation of Russian art and artifacts. It was started in 2002 by a Twin Cities businessman and his wife, Ray Johnson and Sue Johnson. At that point, due to the Cold War, etc., very few people in the West knew the art that was being produced in Russia. But he had a suspicion that given the quality of their literature, given the quality of their ballet, their sports, that they had to also have excelled in the arts. And so he was really able to, for several years, really amass these fine works of art. Now people have come to realize and understand the importance and the quality of the art, and they're very sought after.
This current exhibit that occupies our main level and also our mezzanine level is entitled Russian Impressionism on the Edge of Soviet Art.
This one is called Before the Firing Squad. They have two Germans, and they're deciding which ones of the Russians are going to go to the firing line. And it gives you a sense of the tragic qualities of World War II. But also, the painting is painted so beautifully. You look into it and you can see all the way across the city.
We have, as I said, about 14 docents all of whom are volunteers. As docents, it's a perfect opportunity for us to help people understand why these pictures on the wall are so important and why they need to be understood within their Russian context. You can see it's a very standard impressionistic style of painting. Alexander Gerasimov, painting in the 1930s. He also, however, went on to be the head of the Union of Soviet Artists. He was also a friend of Stalin and Stalin's favorite painter. So he was actually enforcing the restrictions against Impressionist painting while he himself was painting in that style.
We have a curatorial and design team that visit Russia quite frequently, and through those visits we are able to identify great exhibitions that exist there or great works of art that would fit well into an independently curated show.
We came upon all these different Estonian printmakers. I'd never seen it before, and I couldn't get over the quality and the magnetism of the visual impact of each of these pieces.
We've had 24 separate curated exhibitions since we opened here in 2005, so it's a really dynamic, vibrant museum, and anytime people come, there's usually a new change coming.
This is a piece by Caio Poiu, really leaped off the page at me. It's definitely got sort of a Liechtenstein quality to it, a cartoon-like subject in the middle. This piece was made in 1970, so this was still very much in the grips of the Cold War.
People will say, I've heard of the museum, but I've never been to the museum. But once they come back time and again, because it really is a unique treasure here in Minnesota.
I think it's kind of cool because my brother's from Russia. I like the art because it's not like anything I've really seen before.
It's been a lot of fun working here, but it's a lot of work. We have a small staff. We put on a lot of different shows. We try to make it interesting. We try to make it fun. And we're trying to establish ourselves as a real go-to place in Minneapolis.
Well, what better venue for things artistic and literary and exciting and democratic and open and community-oriented than the Minneapolis Central Library, which we're now leaving to wrap up this, the 13th episode of Access to Art. You could watch us Tuesday nights on Minneapolis Television Network's Channel 17 at 8:30. Join us again. Be sure to come to the Minneapolis Library. Take a class at MTN. Visit a gallery. Talk to an artist. Make some art. Get a book about art. Alter a book about art. The possibilities are endless, as are your potentials. Thanks for watching. In other words, like, you don't have to say weeping willow or oak or birch. Just say tree. I know they're trees. And by the way, the only car I can identify to this day is a Volkswagen Beetle. Otherwise, they're all cars. Of course, I'm a non-driver. And a non-tree hugger, apparently. But what else can you be? We're in a library. You can't be a tree hugger here. Slay the bastards. Let's get some literature out. Intention is to make you feel guilty about not getting it, not buying it, and not taking care of the artists who created it. That's the ulterior motive of all art, to make you feel bad. What if I walk through, like, the main floor here and just kind of chastise people with the line, hey, this isn't a library.